The Haunting of Ravenspire. The town of Black Hollow had long stood in the shadow of Ravenspire Manor, a decaying relic perched atop the cliffs overlooking the restless sea. The manor had been abandoned for nearly a century, its windows like hollow eyes staring into the abyss. Few dared to venture near it, for the stories whispered in the dim-lit taverns spoke of terrible things, of vanished travelers, ghostly apparitions, and the mournful cries that echoed through the halls on stormy nights. Eleanor Graves was not one to eat superstition, a historian by trade. She had spent years unraveling the mysteries of forgotten places. When she heard of Ravenspire, she knew she had to see it for herself. She arrived in Black Hollow on a fog-laden morning, her leather satchel filled with notebooks, maps, and an old key she had acquired from a reclusive antiquarian who spoke of Ravenspire as though it were a living thing. The villagers watched her warily, warning her against disturbing what should remain undisturbed, but Eleanor was resolute. She secured a carriage to the edge of the cliffside road, where the once grand iron gates stood rusted and twisted. Pushing them open, she made her way up the overgrown path toward the looming house. The moment she stepped inside, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. Dust motes floated in the pale light seeping through torn curtains. The grand chandelier above swayed ever so slightly, though there was no breeze. She set up her equipment, a journal, a lantern, and an old camera before venturing deeper into the house. The library was the first room that drew her in. Shelves lined with crumbling books loomed over her, their spines cracked and faded. She ran a gloved hand over one, pulling it free. As she flipped through its pages, she saw frantic scrawls on the margins, pleas for help, unfinished sentences, warnings left by an unseen hand. A soft creak behind her made her spin around. Nothing. She swallowed and exhaled slowly, pressing on. Every room held relics of the past, faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her, furniture draped in tattered sheets, an old phonograph whose needle lay frozen on a record long silent. But it was the grand staircase that called to her, spiraling upward into the darkness above. As she ascended, the air grew colder, the walls bore deep gashes, as though something had clawed at them. At the end of the corridor, a door stood ajar, revealing a bedroom frozen in time. A massive four-poster bed sat beneath a shattered window, and beside it, an old wooden cradle rocked slowly, though no wind stirred. Eleanor's breath hitched as a whisper brushed against her ear, a child's voice, distant yet unmistakable. "Help me." She turned sharply, her lantern trembling in her grasp. The cradle creaked again. She took slow steps toward it, peering inside. A small doll lay nestled in the dust, its button eyes missing. When she picked it up, a cold rush of air swept through the room, slamming the door shut behind her. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices filling the air. Shadows gathered in the corners, stretching toward her. Eleanor stumbled back, clutching the doll, her heartbeat hammering in her chest. The journal of the manor's last owner had mentioned a child, a daughter named Annabelle, who had fallen ill and perished within these walls. The whispers became sobs, desperate and pleading. Eleanor, breathless and pale, clutched her satchel and reached for the notebook inside. If she could document this, if she could communicate with whatever lingered here, she could uncover the truth. She barely had time to uncap her pen before the temperature dropped to a bone-chilling cold. The sobs turned to screams, and the shadows took shape, a figure emerging from the darkness, its form twisting and writhing, eyes hollow pits of sorrow. Eleanor wanted to move, to flee, but an invisible force held her in place. Then, the entity spoke, its voice layered with anguish. "They wouldn't let me leave." Eleanor gasped as the figure reached toward her. The room dissolved into a vision, a past long buried. She saw a woman, weeping over a child's frail body, a man locking the doors, sealing the fate of all inside. She saw the walls absorb their misery, the very house becoming a prison for the souls that suffered within. The vision shattered, and Eleanor collapsed, gasping for breath. The room had returned to its decayed state, but the air was different, lighter, as if the weight of years had lifted just a little. She knew then what she had to do. With trembling hands, she retrieved her satchel, pulling out the key she had acquired. If the house had been locked from within, perhaps it needed to be unlocked to free those trapped inside. She ran down the stairs, past the spectral figures that lingered in the shadows, past the whispers that now sounded less like warnings and more like encouragement. She reached the front door and shoved the key into the lock. With a deep breath, she turned it. A deafening silence followed. Then, a sudden rush of wind howled through the halls. The house groaned, the walls shuddering as the very fabric of its curse unraveled. The figures faded, their sorrow lifting into the air like mist at dawn. And then, all was still. Eleanor stumbled out into the morning light. the weight of Ravenspire finally lifting from her shoulders. She turned back one last time. The manor, once a looming specter against the cliffs, seemed smaller now, as if its power had finally waned. She knew the stories of Ravenspire would live on, but now, they would no longer be tales of terror, they would be a testament to those who had suffered, and to the one who had freed them. Moral: the past, no matter how dark, must be acknowledged and understood before it can be put to rest. Fear and ignorance only give power to what haunts us, but courage and knowledge can break even the deepest curses.